And there we go. Okay. Well, a few things to start out is just a little bit of Zoom etiquette that I went over a little earlier. I think a lot of us, since COVID happened, we're doing a lot of things online. So I feel like this is not quite as needed as it was in the beginning. But if you can just stay muted, that is great. Also, there are different things below, like reactions that you can hit. And there's one for raise hand. So if you have a question, you can always hit that. I would ask people to have some paper and a pen with you because we're going to be going over a lot of information and it'll be good to write down notes. And then also, if you have any questions, please write it down. And then there's going to be certain stops throughout the class where I will ask people if they have any questions. Death and dying is a topic that we usually don't talk about. So a lot of times questions will come up quite often. So just sit with those questions, write them down, and then I'll open up for discussion throughout the class. And then I am going to try to fit in at like a half an hour question answer period at the very end. And that's a time where you can ask any questions related to what, we're talking about. Okay. Well, I'm gonna start my screen, share the presentation. So this is Prep U, Disaster Preparedness Intro to At-Home Death Care. And I'm Angela Franklin, and I am one of the founders, along with my husband, of Crossroads Community Death Care. So we do what is called death midwifery. So we give non-medical support to people who are in all stages of life, all stages, even pre-diagnosis of a terminal diagnosis. Just really working with people with death anxiety and supporting individuals and families throughout the dying process and afterwards. So I'm a home funeral guide. I've been trained with the Sacred Crossings Institute. And so I support families in doing home funerals themselves. So a lot of what I know is educating families and community on how to do at-home death care and funerals. And then also I do quite a bit of grief and bereavement work. So really my work with individuals and families and community doesn't stop at the moment of death. I'm still connected with people years after someone has died. So I guess one of the things I wanted to say is I'm not an expert. I'm just a person who has experience being around death and dying. And this class, I hope, will just give you the basic information needed to not feel so overwhelmed when you're in a situation where you have someone who is dying at home, or in time of a disaster, when you are cut off from resources. And as a community, you kind of have to step up and do some of the things that we necessarily would never consider having to do. So let's see. So the objectives of this class is debunking myths around death and dying, that at-home death care is possible, that dead bodies are not necessarily dangerous. Also caring for the dying. So what does it mean to sit bedside with someone at home? And also the changes to observe in someone who is in the dying process and what active dying can look like. And then we'll end the class with some body preparation. So we'll talk about washing, shrouding, keeping a body cool. And then we'll look a little bit into how we can integrate ceremony into some of these practical actions to create, like a wake funeral. And then also we'll talk about burial. And to keep in mind that this is a class that is in the context of a natural disaster. So some of the things that we'll be talking about are not necessarily what you would do in a regular situation. So just to keep that in mind. So at-home death care is an ancient tradition. These are some pictures of home funerals. Before the Civil War, all over the world, in the United States, having your dead stay at home and doing the funerals and the wakes and burying the body was something that families did. It was common knowledge of how to do these things. And so I have a couple more pictures. These are pictures, the whole entire family and community was involved. And these are some pictures of a Slavic funeral. And down below is a picture of a shrouded person. So all of these are really old funeral pictures. So the shift that happened in our relationship with death as a community and as a family really happened during the Civil War. So during the Civil War was the first time that we had such a mass number of people that died, the soldiers. And I believe it was, 400,000 soldiers died in the field. And so there was this crisis of how do we get the soldiers back to their families? And it was not a pleasant thing. There was a lot of heat and decomposition, and a few people decided that they were going to try to bring back some of the ancient traditions of preservation. And this is what we know now as embalming. And they really, it was a bit crude methods of embalming that now are a lot different. But as you can see in this picture, they would basically drain the fluids out of the body, and then they would replace it at that time in the Civil War with arsenic and mercury. So that has changed these days. And the purpose of that is to preserve them just temporary, enough to get them back to the family so that they could do burials. Another thing that shaped our, from being, at-home death care is Lincoln's, when he died. So when he died, they had a funeral train that brought his embalmed body all over the states, or mostly the East Coast of the states, to Illinois. And so as you can see in this picture, thousands of people came out to see Lincoln's body. And this is really the first time that people saw a dead body that was preserved. And it shifted people's ideal of what a dead body should look like. And so from this time on, really the funeral industry began. And so with the funeral industry, they really pushed for embalming to help, preserve people, to create this ideal image of death. So I just wanted to go over, first off, that, is embalming necessary? A lot of what our experience with death and funerals, most people will know of people being embalmed, because when there's a funeral that has open casket, most funeral homes have a policy that the person needs to be embalmed. But embalming is not required by law. Unembalmed bodies, according to the CDC, the WHO, and the PANO, that they are not dangerous, and that, so I think that, sorry, my computer is not cooperating. So basically, when it comes to at-home death care during a natural disaster, embalming is not going to be available. So that's one of the reasons why I'm bringing this up, is just to help people understand that it's not necessary, and that it is mainly a cosmetic procedure. So you don't have to worry about having a body that's not embalmed. And so those two things, the Civil War, dealing with the mass amount of dead soldiers, and Lincoln's funeral, is the main kind of catalyst for the shift of family-centered at-home death care. And so what happened is that death becomes this medical event. The funeral industry, has relieved us of the burden of dealing with the dead. And embalming has created this ideal look for the dead that has become the norm. So I'm really curious, and I think a lot of people in the home funeral world, we like to talk to people about how this has affected our culture and how it's shifted our relationship to death. So I don't know if anyone, this is a good time to open it up just a little bit for anyone if they wanted to make a comment on home funerals, and if this is something that they feel like is possible, and maybe why we are not so comfortable with that idea, if you're not comfortable with that idea. And if you want to just put it in the chat, you can, or if you wanted to unmute, you could unmute as well.
I think culturally we've been trained, as soon as someone dies, we have to race them off to the funeral home. And that's not really true. And that deprives the family sometimes of that closure, of having that opportunity to be with that individual near their death.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Skylar. Anyone else have any comments?
Are there any legalities around not contacting someone right when somebody dies? If you had, someone's dying of natural causes, and they're with you and they pass away, and then you get a hold of somebody and go, well, yeah, they died about 10 hours ago. We were just getting together as a family, or they died yesterday. Is there any repercussion for that, or does it not matter?
It does matter if someone dies of natural causes and is already on hospice, where it's known of their eventual death. You don't need to call for the funeral home or the ambulance. You have to, within 48 hours of a death, you need to be able to file a death certificate. So in normal circumstances, you do need to inform because you need to be able to document cause of death. But when, like I said, if you're in hospice and they already know what your cause of death is going to be, then you have a lot more leeway. But you definitely, like at the time of death, you do not have to do anything right away. And we'll get into that a little bit more later in the class.
I have a comment I'd like to make.
Yeah.
I think that our society, well, for me personally, not so much now, but there's been a lot of fear associated with death for me. And, you know, being around, I think it's because of movies that you saw as a child, you know, with all these horror movies that they would have out. So, you know, I felt a lot of fear. And then the other thing besides fear is there's a lot of superstition associated with death, you know, like evil spirits or whatever. So I think that affects the way we, you know, call the funeral home and get the loved one, you know, off the premises because of fear and superstition.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel in my experience, I've noticed that a lot of people, when they do it themselves, even just little aspects, you know, and they don't have their the person who died rushed away, that it becomes less scary. You know, it's kind of like the more experience you have, the more time you have in those circumstances, the more you realize that it's not quite as scary as, you know, you create in your mind. So, okay, well, I'm going to move on. So the first thing that I wanted, or the second thing I guess I wanted to debunk, is that dead bodies are dangerous. So concerning that dead bodies are infectious can be considered a natural reaction by persons wanting to protect themselves from disease, although the risk that bodies that died in a natural disaster pose for the public is extremely small. And this is from the Pan American Health Organization. Transmission of infection requires the presence of an infectious agent, exposure to that agent, and a susceptible host. So the human body is host to many organisms inside of us and on our skin, and only some of which are pathogenic. So when the body dies, the environment in which pathogens live can no longer sustain them. Microorganisms involved in the decay process, which is referred to as putrefaction, are not pathogenic. So one of the things is called miasma theory. And so miasma theory is an obsolete medical theory that says that epidemics such as cholera and, you know, the Black Death, they were caused by miasma. And miasma is this noxious form of bad air that's emanating from a rotting organic matter. So, you know, just being in the vicinity of a dead body, that is not going to cause disease. That's not going to cause an epidemic. So transmission of infectious agents from a cadaver to a living person, they can occur. And the infectious hazards for individuals who routinely handle cadavers. So if you're not handling a cadaver and it's not getting moved in your nearby vicinity, there's really no worry. But the people who are handling, and for this class, you know, if tuberculosis, group A strep, and the flu. So, you know, COVID, we're talking about that. Hep B, Hep C, HIV, meningitis. And out of all of these, the only one that's going to last more than just a few hours is HIV. And so HIV can actually last live in the body for up to 6 days. And so that is one of the few things that you do need to be concerned about if you're going to be routinely handling cadavers. And then let's see. So infections are more likely to be present in disaster victims than in are not likely, sorry. Infections are no more likely to be present in disaster victims than in the general population. So just because we have a natural disaster does not mean that the people who have died from that natural disaster are more infectious than the people who are just walking around. Also, like I said before, the agents of infection are unable to survive very long in the human body following death. And so contact with a cadaver, you're very unlikely to be infected. So the one thing that is cause for serious health hazards is dead or decaying human bodies polluting drinking water with fecal matter. And so in case studies from all over the world, that was what was cause for concern. So we really have to make sure that we are having good sanitation and that we are keeping our drinking water clean and that we are not contaminating any of those sources. So that's the cause for unhealth during natural disasters. Okay. So let's see. I think I'm beating a dead horse here. Okay. So management and care of dead bodies when resources are limited due to a natural disaster. So I wanted to touch upon this because it's not likely. So during natural disaster, the state is responsible for coordinating retrieval of dead bodies, identification, storage, and temporary disposition. And so there's a protocol that the state agencies have and that they follow. So during a natural disaster, it's really important to not get in the way of those agencies. So if you're living like in Grants Pass and you're living in a populated area, more than likely, you're going to be able to get help from state agencies. They're going to be able to do a lot of that processing. So if you are living in a more rural setting, like out in the Illinois Valley, and let's say we're cut off from having those agencies come in, then I'm going to just talk about some of the protocols to keep in mind to help deal with dead bodies. And then after that, we'll go into at-home death care. And we'll talk about when someone that that's already on hospice, someone who's expected that they're going to be dying, how we would care for them. So the first thing is that obviously you want to gather the community members that are able-bodied to help document the identified and the unidentified bodies. So during times of disaster, identification becomes harder as time passes. And so what people want to do is to photograph and document the location of where a body was found. You want to document the body and the features with a unique code. So, you know, some number letter combination. And you want to keep notes, like really good notes on what the person looked like, what their, you know, what their race, ethnicity, I can't really tell what race is, sex, you know, height, what items they had on their body at the time. And, you know, write all of these things down. And it's even good when you're taking pictures to have that code like written on a piece of paper somewhere in the picture, so that later on, you know, all of us have digital photography. So we're not actually like taking film photos. So to keep all of those photos kind of ordered. And so that information will go into a waterproof bag, like a Ziploc, and you want to keep that attached to the person. So the next thing is the storage, refrigeration if possible, but who knows if there's power or not, or generators. So at least if we have generators, then there's a possibility of doing ice packs. So dry ice is like typically the best thing to help with refrigeration for preserving. But then also there's a thing called Techni Ice, which is a polymer ice pack that is really useful. And I have later on in the class, I have some pictures of what those look like. So that's something that would be really good to maybe, you know, have in your prep bag, is the ice packs. Also, it's really important not to use ice. You know, melted water with the ice can get mixed with fecal matter, and then that can be a contaminant, and it's gonna, you know, possibly go into water supply. It's just really messy. So we do not want to use just ice. So the main thing is just to keep cool and covered. And if there is no cooling method available, if it's, you know, during the summertime, then a temporary way of doing it is a burial of 5 feet, because at 5 feet there's hardly any oxygen in the ground, and it becomes a natural cooler. So it'll slow decomposition, and you want to make sure that it is from a drinking source. Now, all of the manuals and the things, they say 200 meters from drinking water source, but that's over 600 feet. So that's a little extreme. I think maybe that's for like mass amounts of bodies. But when you're talking about 1 or 2 people, you know, within, I would say 200 feet from a drinking source is fine. In home burials, it only has to be 100 feet from a drinking source by the in Josephine County. So another thing to consider when dealing is the safety for the living. So like I said before, the sewage system might be compromised. So have your alternative sanitation. So maybe a composting bucket system. I'm not sure if this Prep U probably has other classes that go over stuff like that. And also, corpses are not generally a health risk, but we always want to make sure that when we are handling any bodies that we wear gloves, we protect our face and cover any wounds that you may have. And always, always best practice is to wash your hands as often as you can. So when dealing, with dead bodies, when resources are really limited in a natural disaster, so the greatest threat is mainly psychological, because we're not used to seeing dead bodies, and we're definitely not used to seeing dead bodies in mass numbers. Witnessing the death of loved ones is pretty much always going to be hard. And then also witnessing the destruction within our communities. So there's a lot of psychological trauma that is going to be going on. So we need to tend to that as well. Okay, so I'm going to go into now the scenario that I'm most familiar with, and that's caring for a loved one at home. So this is a very simple at-home death care. And so these pictures are actually, this first one, that's me, and I'm sitting bedside with my mother when she was in hospice. And that's my youngest son, and he was there. Both of the children were there the whole time. The next picture is my teacher, Olivia, and being bedside with one of her clients. So we're going to talk about sitting bedside, comfort care, and active dying. So sitting bedside, really, your presence is enough. There's not much that you need to do when someone is in their very final days. And so one of the things that we are taught is to have a strong back, but a soft front. And so when you're sitting bedside, to really feel the strength in your spine that brings groundedness and protection, but also having that soft front allows for you to have an openness and really to be able to be a compassionate, loving presence for the person. And so in the final days, there's not a lot to say. There's not a lot to do. And really learning to be comfortable with silence is really important. Because what you're doing is that you're creating like a safe container for that person to die in. So you want to think about the environment, and creating not pushing your ideals onto the person, and not making small talk, and just really just being present. A really good thing is to always ask if someone wants to be touched, and to refrain from asking how a person is doing. Are you okay? And more asking, just watching for like nonverbal communication and going from there. So the changes to observe in the dying. So the first one is there's going to be a weakness in the body. Usually the legs and the arms lose strength first, and they may feel cool or cold as the energy leaves them. The need to eat and the ability to digest food diminishes. Oftentimes, we ask people if they want to eat, or we prepare them food and we want them to eat. We want them to drink water. But really, people stop wanting to eat and drink, and it's okay. That's a sign that their body is starting to shut down and is dying. And so I will tell families to maybe not offer food, but if someone asks for food, to then give them food, and very small amounts. So just, start with one small spoon of food, and then wait and see if they want more. Because a person can, it can take 10 days without, at least 10 days without food for someone to die. And you can live even longer if you're drinking water. So a little bit of food and water will go a very long way when someone is in their dying process. The ability to swallow is lost. So a lot of times, like moistening or cleaning the mouth is really comforting. Lip balm is nice to have. Also, urination will become dark and yellow and very decreased. And then bowel movements will be reduced and stopped. If a person doesn't have a bowel movement within 3 days, then that can become really painful. And so you want to make sure that you have a laxative on hand to help with that, because you want to reduce the pain. And if you go to your local pharmacy, there's a lot of different options that the pharmacist will give you, especially for hospice patients. They have a lot of good things. So that's something that you can have in your prep kit. So sleeping patterns are altered. The dying people might sleep during the day and be more active at night. It's really common. So you might just get sleep when you can, or try to have the same sleep schedule as the person. It will definitely help. Increased heart rate and irregular pulse. When people are lying in bed, you'll often see like a throbbing neck or pulsating veins in their neck. And that is the heart trying to deliver more blood to the body. And it's nothing to worry about. It's just part of the process. Congestion of breathing. So this is one of the things that I wish I would have known when my mother was dying, because I was not told that this was something that could happen. And so as the body loses its ability to process secretions and the fluids back up into the lungs, a lot of times it'll be like a gurgling sound. And it seems like they're in distress, but a lot of times they're not in distress. And by just raising the head up can sometimes help that. Or raising the chest area with pillows can help that. But suctioning should be avoided because it's pretty uncomfortable to do. Let's see. So restlessness. This is caused by lack of oxygen to the brain, and it can be distressing to watch. So, just being a quiet, reassuring voice, Ask if they want like a gentle massage or soft music. That can help. And then also, just explaining to the person, what is happening, that it's their body that is dying. And I mean, it depends on what your beliefs are. But that, yeah, the spirit doesn't die. It's just the body that's dying. And sometimes that can be comforting. Also, anxiety attacks. That's caused by the mind, conjuring up terrifying thoughts, and doing a little bit of guided meditation or just guided breathing exercises can help calm the dying. And then also just like matching your breathing with the person, placing your hand on their chest and just kind of breathing with them sometimes can help calm a person. And, some anti-anxiety medication might be necessary. A person who's on hospice, that is part of their comfort care. A lot of times they'll give a bit of anxiety medication, anti-anxiety medication. And then also dramatic change in the breathing pattern. So this can occur with rapid, shallow breaths. And then it'll seem like the person's not breathing for like 20 seconds. And so it can be like really long breaths, big periods of no breathing, and then a bunch of like really regular breathing, and then irregular, quick. And then, so it's just like there's an inconsistency of breathing and a really dramatic change. And typically that happens for, a day to a few hours until the time of death. And so this is referred to as Cheyne-Stokes breathing. And it's a sign of imminent death that can happen within hours, up to 3 days sometimes. People have referred to it as the death rattle. It can be really loud, but most people will tell you that have been with the dying a lot that it doesn't seem to be anything of distress. It's just the fluids mixed with the breathing. And I think it's maybe more scary for us that are sitting bedside than the actual people that are dying. Okay, so I just quickly, before I go into this, it is common that people will wait until everyone is out of the room to actually take their last breath. A lot of times people say, I just went to the bathroom and I came back and, they had died, or I just went to go do this other part of the house, and there's this like a feeling of guilt of not being there during that last breath. But sometimes I think people wait to maybe relieve the person of not being there, or feeling like they're too attached. So that's just something to consider, to maybe give a little space here and there, just in case the person that you're sitting bedside with, is waiting for you to not be in the room. But I would definitely be in the room as much as possible, but also giving that space. So this is a really beautiful, this is just a abbreviated version of after the moment of death. And so this is by Sarah Kerr. She's a death doula and a ritual healing practitioner. So she says that when someone dies, the first thing to do is nothing. Don't run out and call the nurse. Don't pick up the phone. Take a deep breath and be present to the magnitude of the moment. So there's a grace to being at the bedside of someone you love as they make their transition out of this world. At the moment they take their last breath, there's an incredible sacredness in the space. The veil between the world opens. Being present in the moments after death is an incredible gift to yourself. It's a gift to the people you're with, and it's a gift to the person who just died. There's just a hair's breadth. They are just a hair's breadth away. They're just starting their new journey in the world without a body. And if you keep a calm space around their body and in the room, they're launched in a more beautiful way. It's a service to both sides of the veil. So I really thought that that was an amazing part. So the next, let's see. So I'm going to go into body preparations, but I want to pause just for a moment and give people a chance to, I would say we have 4 minutes until 7. So I want to let people take a bathroom break or refill their water or anything like that. So if you want to come back around 7 o'clock. So that's 3-4 minutes from now.
Awesome. Thank you, Angela. This is Emily with Josephine County Emergency Management. I was putting a few things in chat, basically kind of mirroring some things you said along the way that I thought were good points for people to chew on. I did have one quick question, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll get into it. But in terms of like simple home remedies for anxiety, is aromatherapy helpful, do you find at all, if it's a scent they like, or is that too much, or do you have an experience with that?
If it's a person who's used to aromatherapy, then I think that that is a great tool to create a calming. But if it's someone who is not used to essential oils and aromatherapy, then I would refrain because it might be a little bit too much. So if it's someone that, your spouse or one of your family members, doing things that you already know are calming to them is a good idea.
Well, and something to think about, powerful sensory experiences is on the person that is living. You will forever remember that vanilla scent with grandma dying.
Yeah, definitely. Rose, I will never forget Rose, was affiliated with my mom. And so, yeah, so Emily put in about singing, reading, playing music. Singing, you'll know. So if you're able to read nonverbal, so I've had people that I've sat with that loved me singing. And then I've had other people that, like would scrunch their face. And so like, just notice those signs and yeah. And, just calm things unless someone, if they're still verbal and they'll tell you, what they like and they don't like. But just quite often when someone's in their final days, they're not verbal all the time.
Perfect. I'll be back in a minute at 7.
Yeah, I'm going to run to the restroom as well. So it'll be just a couple of minutes. Okay. Well, I wanted, before we get back into more of body preparation, I want to open it up once again to any questions or clarifications on things that we've already gone over tonight.
I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
Going back to, say, if there's a disaster and maybe, you know, you're out, like you said, in the Illinois Valley. What, you said that you like keep good notes and then you write the notes down and you put them in a Ziploc bag and you attach it to the body. Is that? Did I get that right?
Yeah. Sometimes people will think about like writing it on the body, like a number or, and that will get wiped off or, you know, won't be there later on. And so the best thing is to have like a waterproof, and they use waterproof tags and they write, you know, information on it. But since, you know, we're not the professionals that have all of this, the next best thing would be to secure that information in a waterproof something. And so,
So would you
yeah.
need to put like your name on it, like you're the contact person,
and
you wrote it?
yes, so you should put, sorry, yeah. So you should put that the person who found the person, their name and contact, and also, you know, to keep a log that is the same information that's
Oh, so
not.
for yourself?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
so you have 2 copies.
Yeah.
And then how soon, you know, would the body need to be buried? Is it like 24 hours or 48 hours or what's the timeline?
If it's obvious that there is not help that is going to be arriving anytime soon, if the weather is above 65 degrees, really, I would say 3 days is, you know, a good amount of time. A body can stay out, you know, for quite some time, you know, in colder weather. But what we want to do is that we want to preserve it, just in case we need to, you know, be able to identify.
So in other words, if you buried it, like, I thought you said 5 feet, that's not like a permanent burial. That's just like
No.
a temporary burial.
Yep,
And you
that's
wouldn't want to permanently bury it?
So in every death, there needs to be a cause of death declared. And so it wouldn't be a permanent burial because that would have to be identified and put down in records. So more than likely, anything that we would be doing during a natural disaster is going to be a temporary burial and disposition. So one thing that
Yeah, sorry, this is Emily. And I know you'll go into this a little bit because there's a difference, right, between if we're talking about strangers or neighbors who aren't quite family to us, or a situation further away from our home versus folks in our household that we may already have pre-existing understandings or agreements with, or even obligations or rights to do a permanent burial. And I know you'll talk about that, but in terms of say folks who are strangers to us, for lack of a better term, in a disaster, and we're trying to maybe both, you know, at least for safety or water preservation, do a temporary burial. the marking of the location, even if you're not able to leave it with the body, but if you take notes and have notes with yourself, is for folks who are going to come around at some point. Because you just never know. Maybe this person you thought was always single and had no family, but it turns out that a niece from the East Coast shows up, 8 months later. And your information will be, super helpful and key in helping agencies or that family member make that identification, and then whatever final funeral arrangements they have, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then,
Can I add something really quick before we move on to something else?
oh yeah,
So what I forgot to put this in the presentation, is that oftentimes after a natural disaster, people start maybe panicking about dead bodies, and they will opt to do two things that we should never do. And one is doing mass burials. So that is like digging a big pit and then just depositing the dead bodies in there. Because when those bodies are recovered, it's very hard to identify them. And it's not respectful. And then the second thing is cremation. And so people have in disasters done mass cremations, which is really needs to be avoided, because then identification is impossible. So those are two things that no government agency now will do, because they know that it's not how to do it. And so the way that for mass burial, for temporary, is to do what's called a trench burial. And so basically it's a really long trench, and the bodies are placed just one at a time, moved over to the next is another body. And even like in Japan, during earthquakes, they'll put pieces of wood between the bodies to make sure that they're absolutely separated. So that is something to consider. So always have someone that has a backhoe in your pocket.
Angela, this is Ricky. Can I ask one thing, or maybe add one thing? I would think it would be important in a situation like that, where it's just you and someone who's passed away who has clearly no voice to share any details about anything, that if it's possible, there would be more than one witness to what's happening, like a neighbor or a friend or a family member. So that it's both names and both people recording information and both people accountable, rather than just, well, they had a long standing history of not liking each other, those two neighbors. Now he's dead and he's the one that buried him. I mean, it just seems like it might be wise to, have a witness.
I totally agree. That's why it's good to gather a number of community members, because this is not something that is going to be easily done by yourself, nor should you put yourself in this situation on your own. Like that would be not ideal. That's a lot of trauma that you're going to be put through. So having a good number of community coming together to do this together is, what you want to do. Is there another question, Janice?
yes. So you said if the temperature is above 65 degrees, I guess you wouldn't have as much time as if it was below 65 degrees. You have maybe 3 days, but what about if it's above 65 degrees? How much time do you have then?
I mean, you just want to get the identification process going. And if you aren't able to do refrigeration or a burial, within a certain amount of time, you know, a body that's going through decomposition is not a danger unless it is contaminating your water source. So, does that make sense? So, I mean,
Well,
if
I'm thinking it, you know, it wouldn't be a pleasant thing to have a, you know, a body that's decomposing, you know,
Yeah.
you have to do something.
not necessarily. I mean, I would hope that we would be able to do something. But if you have a group of people that are not able to, you know, to dig or, you know, whatnot, it just needs to be known that that body is not going to make you sick. You know, it's not what we want, but it just needs to be known that that body's not going to make you sick, especially if it's in an outside situation. So, someone just asked about the recording. I'll be emailing out the recording afterwards, probably within 2 weeks, hopefully within a week. Okay. So we'll jump back in to the presentation so that we can have a little bit of question and answer time at the end. So let's go to screen share. Okay. So body preparations. So with the body preparation, you can incorporate ceremony into some of these practical actions if you choose. Because I have found, and others also have found, that physical action, doing a physical task to help care for the body of a loved one, that action can help transmute our grief and is a really good coping skill for our mourning and grief. And so that can kind of be applied creatively into a lot of different home funeral and death care practices. One easy one and very simple is to include a blessing as you're washing the body of a person. And so just like as you're going through the different parts of the body to, you know, bless the mouth, the eyes for everything that they've seen, you know, the neck, the voice, we bless, you know, for all of the words that were given to us, you know, basically whatever association you have with that body part, it can be a really sweet, simple ceremony to add with the body preparations. Ooh. Okay, so washing the body, these are some supplies that you may need. Not all of them you know, are necessary. If you don't have them, we just do the best that we can, especially when we're in a situation where we don't have a lot of resources. So 3 to 4 small washcloths and 2 bowls of warm water. I say 2 bowls because if 2 people are doing this, it's a lot easier. And so one person can be washing and then the other person can be refilling. So like to have clean water. Wet wipes are always good. Make it some of the more unclean spots easier to clean. Shampoo or dry shampoo. Dry shampoo is a little bit easier to use. Also toothbrush, mouthwash, And then absorbent pads, there's what we call chucks. So there's disposable ones, and there's also like reusable, washable absorbent pads. And if you don't have those, then a towel that's been doubled can be useful. Castile soap, so like Dr. Bronner's, because it doesn't suds, a ton. So it's easy to just simply rinse that. Sometimes you don't even need to rinse it. You can just go over it. Cotton balls, medical gloves. It's okay to want to wear gloves. If there's, open wounds, bed sores, things like that. Or, while you're cleaning the groin area, that is probably to use medical gloves. And then also doing an antimicrobial spray. So tea tree oil, you can use that as a spray, or thieves oil, which is a blend of a bunch of different oils. And then also, if you want essential oils, or if you are not an essential oil person, you can just do natural balms and oils that have different scents. So the most common ones used in death care are myrrh, frankincense, and lavender are kind of the ones that a lot of people like to use, but you can use whatever you want. So washing the body. So ideally, this is with at least 2 people. So you want to first remove the clothing. And if you feel so, you can drape a small towel over the breasts or the groin, depending on if they male or female. And then you want to wash the arms and legs first while the deceased is on their back. And then this is where having a second person is really useful. So you want to roll the body onto its side. And during this process, when you're rolling onto its side, this is the time where there might be a little bit of leakage from the mouth, which is fine, just wiping that. And then also any urine or a little bit of fecal matter might seep at that time. A person who is, expected to die, who's been dying at home, isn't going to have a lot of fecal matter or urine. Really, it's people who die in hospitals that have been on feeding tubes and with IVs that have a lot more in their bowels. So that something to consider. So a good way is to cross the legs of the person towards you as you're standing on their side and pulling the waist and shoulder towards you. So you want to remove any soiled bedding, and I have a picture. So this is hands on the shoulder and the hips. And so I'm going to go back. So you want to remove any soiled bedding, and you want to apply the absorbent pads and the towels. And with 2 people, you kind of have to roll the person back, go to the other side, roll them towards you. There's a little bit, it can be a little bit tricky, but it'll be okay. So at this time, when they're on their side, after you've changed, or you might want to wait to change the soil bedding until after you do the cleaning. You can spray the backside with an antimicrobial spray. And then this also is the time where cleaning the rectal area is easiest, because if their leg is crossed, it's a little easier to wipe that area. So cotton balls being used to pack the rectum to avoid leakage. It's not necessary, but it's just one step if you feel like that's something that you can do. then I suggest doing that because you won't have to worry about any leakage whatsoever if you do that. Also, the teeth brushed. So you don't necessarily have to use toothpaste. You use a toothbrush dipped in mouthwash. And so that way you're going to be, two birds, one stone cleaning. And so the mouth is going to be a big source of bacteria and also smell. So you want to try to clean the mouth as much as you can. And then if they had dentures, you can put their dentures back in their mouth. It's not necessary, but a lot of people do. Make sure you use a lot of denture cream, the adhesive, and then hold the chin up and let it sit for, a good couple of minutes to make sure that it sets. And then shampooing the hair, it's not necessary, but if you would like to shampoo their hair, you can. And so you can do the dry shampoo, or you can do wet shampoo. And in this picture, you'll see that they're using a trash bag. And so you can just use the trash bag itself, or what I've done is that you place that inside of an empty plastic trash pan. And then you cut a hole in the bottom of the trash bag. So it's like a big funnel. So then the water just goes into the trash can and it's easy to dispose of. So that is, let's see. Okay. So also, in case there was any trauma, large wounds can be covered with gauze and then taped shut. And yeah, so you can just bind the wounds if they have any. Also, if the body has a lot of fluid retention, like edema, swelling in the legs or in the belly, it might be helpful to wrap these with the disposable chucks and securing with tape. But this is really only if you decide that you're going to have a viewing. So during these times of crisis and natural disaster, we can still come together as a community and hold a ceremony, and we can have a viewing and a wake. So this is only necessary to prevent seepage. And then the last thing you want to do is dress or shroud the body. Not many people are going to have a casket in their garage. If you do, congratulations, that's awesome. But if you don't, the best thing to do is to shroud the body, and we'll go over that next. So these are
Angela?
Yeah.
What are chucks in this? You're not talking about wood chucks.
Oh, chucks. I said chucks are the throwaway absorbent pads. So they're disposable absorbent pads. Yeah. Okay, so shrouding the body. So this picture to the left is a dear friend and local Illinois Valley resident who died, and we shrouded her. And the person on the right side is a fellow death midwifery person, and she shrouded her 18-year-old daughter who passed away. So you can see that there's strips that are laid underneath the body. Those will aid with to lifting the body when needed, and also to tie. So this, I apologize for the horrible illustrations. So what you can do is you can shroud a body with a queen size sheet is adequate. You can also shroud with their favorite blanket or with any fabric. It just needs to be enough fabric to cover, fully enwrap the body. So you'll see this first picture of the square or of the triangle. This is a sheet. So when they're on the bed or on a table, you put it like a diamond. And then the next step is to fold up onto the feet. And if you choose to, you can cover the face, or you can leave the top open for the viewing. And then right before you bury the person, you can close it up. So this one shows just fully closed. So then you take one side and then you wrap it around the body and tuck it. And then you take the other side and wrap it around. And then you use the ties. And it's really good to have 3 ties for the feet, tie around the waist and kind of securing the arms to the body. And then also one that secures the, like around the shoulders and the neck. It doesn't have to be super tight around the neck, but just enough to keep the fabric together. So the next thing that we're going to talk about is cooling the body. So with home funerals, what we normally do is use dry ice, or we use polymer ice packs. And one of the brands that is often used is Techni Ice. So the dry ice, you'll see the picture, is wrapped in paper bags because dry ice will burn you if you touch it. So you want to make sure that you handle dry ice with the appropriate gloves, and you only need to cool really the torso of a body. So enough ice, like 30 pounds on the bottom and then 10 pounds laying on the stomach is really adequate. And that'll last for a day in most like 65-degree weather. Polymer ice packs, the Techni Ice, if you see on the right here, it just comes in flat sheets. So, and you have to activate it. So you soak it in water, and then once it absorbs the water, then you freeze it, and then it's activated and able to use. So you basically want, and you can also cut them into smaller sections. So you can just like put it around, the neck, or, at the shoulder blades. So it's a little bit easier to handle, but you have to change it twice as often. So you have to make sure that you have 2 sets, one in the freezer and then one on the body, and then you switch them out. So it's this like kind of constant switching. And this is really only if we have access to these things. If we don't, in the very first pictures, when we saw, the old funerals at home, they didn't use any of these things. And so, it's 3 days without refrigeration. It's not ideal, but, it'll be okay. And you don't have to do 3 days, but, it gives you a little bit of time to dig if that's what's going to happen. So this is the ceremony aspect. So it's very easy to create like a really beautiful, simple ceremony, what I like calling laying in honor. And so using flowers, using any vegetation, it's something that can easily be done, and welcoming the community in to be able to say goodbye to our loved ones is a really special thing. So transporting, this first picture is using sheets is a really good way of moving a body. Just make sure that it's not a stretchy sheet. It's really difficult. I mean, you can do it, but it takes a lot more people to move a person using a stretchy sheet. And the top of the body, the head and the shoulders weighs a lot more than the feet. So if you're choosing people, make sure that the stronger people are at the top of the head of the body, and maybe the people who are a little bit not as strong will be in charge of the feet and legs. And so this next one, this is a shroud that they're using a carrying, like a slider sheet. So it's a sheet that has handles attached to it. It's a little heavier weight fabric. I think it's either canvas or maybe like duck cloth. And so that's one method to move a shrouded body. Like I said, if you have a casket, then it definitely takes like 6 to 8 people to carry a casket. So just keep that in mind. And then this last one, a carrying board. So just having a long piece of wood, you can attach 2 pieces of, or a couple pieces of 2x4 together and create a carrying board. And with the grave, having the slats underneath is a good idea. And then you can lift the board and remove the slats to lower the body into the grave. And then burial. So digging a grave by hand is really hard work. And it's possible, but it's going to take a couple of people and taking turns. It's going to take like a day, especially in our soil, because most of our ground, it's tough. So just ahead of time, locate a person in your community that has a backhoe. Talk to them and say, hey, how would you feel in an emergency situation? Would you be, able to help us out here? Prep you. It's all about pre-planning. So yeah, if you have a backhoe, then that is amazing, and maybe be willing to help the community out if it happens. So temporary burial, once again, 5 feet is what will slow decomposition and away from drinking water source, because really exhumation is going to be expected unless, like Emily said, unless the person was on hospice, they have been seeing a medical person and it's documented that they have a terminal diagnosis, then you may be able to have a home burial if it fits within the regulations. And I'll go over what that is in just a moment. But if you do not have those things, just expect that this is just a temporary burial. So, so the body will be moved, or at least brought out, and cause of death, and then maybe put back if it is a place that you already have approved.
With that in mind, is there anything you should do as you bury the body so it makes it easier to exhume?
I think just not putting, I don't know. I think just the 5-foot burial. I mean, it's going to be rough digging 5 feet out again, but it'll help preserve, you know.
The shrouding, if you use a shrouding method like she's showing here or something like that, will certainly help. And certainly you could consider putting like a small triangular board or something, a plank if you wish to, as a marker of the depth.
Yeah.
And I'm just
This is
thinking,
something that
as you dig the grave, a backhoe is fine, but I'm not so sure that that's how you want to take them back out.
Well, they
Well,
would,
no, that wouldn't be allowed anyway.
yeah. Or at least if they know it's 5 feet deep, they could use a backhoe for just the initial, 3 feet depth, and then they'd hand dig the rest. But I wanted to quickly talk about home burial in Josephine County. So if you hold title to your land that you live on, you live outside of city limits, then you are legally able to have a home burial. So you have to get a permit through Josephine County Health Department, and an inspector will come out, probably Justin, and he will say whether or not the spot that you've chosen is okay. So you need to be, I actually left my sheet, but I think it's 25 feet from a property line, 100 feet from a water source, and that's a fail on my part. I should have had that. But it's very easy. Emily, do you know?
Oh, we can share that back out afterwards. I feel like
Okay.
it's 150 from a water source, but you're very close. It's pretty simplistic.
Yeah. And on the form, there's a grid. So you draw your property and then mark different, like a tree or your house and how much distance it is from the property lines. And you mark an X where it's going to be buried. And so it costs $201 for the inspection. And besides that, home burial is totally possible. So funeral homes will help with this. And then also if you want help from, a home funeral guide like myself, then not using a funeral home is a possibility also. Like it's something that under most circumstances can happen. There's a few things that might not make it possible, but more often than not, it's totally possible for the family to just take care of the body and bury it. So this picture is, yep.
Real quick, do you know, because I'm not sure, how long does that, in terms of pre-planning, if people wanted to make this part of their pre-planning, how long in advance can you get that permit, and does it have to be renewed?
There is no time restraint. So you could get this done tomorrow, and as long as you still live on that spot and hold the deed, it will stay good for forever. Yeah, and so there are other aspects of doing a legal home burial, and that I can answer at another time because there's more to go in depth on that. So I just wanted to end with saying that, so I was trained through Sacred Crossings Institute, and it's an alternative funeral home down in LA. So if you're interested in learning more about death midwifery, you can go to sacredcrossings.com lots of good pictures and videos and stories. Also, two other really good resources is the National Home Funeral Alliance. I'm a member of that, and there are such good resources about body preparation, basically how to hold a home funeral. So in this context, a lot of the information will be very useful for people that want to be prepared. The other one is the Oregon Funeral Resources and Education. This is an amazing website. It's all about Oregon. So not many states have a website, a resource like this. So that is OregonFuneral.org. And it has links to a lot of literature and specific regulations and laws specific to Oregon residents. So those are two things. And then this is myself, community, Crossroads Community Death Care. You all should have the email from the flyer. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and then open this up to questions. We have about 15 minutes left. I'm fine to go over a little bit if necessary. So I'm gonna, just open it to folks. If you have any questions related to at-home death care, death midwifery, anything.
I have a question.
Okay.
This past year, my sister-in-law passed away and we were caring for her, and she was on hospice. She had a massive brain tumor. And my question is, right after after she passed, her mouth was open, and not really knowing how to do it, I just put my hand under her chin to see if I could get it, and didn't do anything. And then the hospice nurse came, the one that had to actually pronounce her gone. And then he, removed the catheter and did some other things. We were out of the room when he was doing that. And when I came back in, her lips were turned up. She looked so pretty. It was, I don't know how he did it, but the nurses know how to do it, or I'm sure you know how to do it. So can you share that?
So right after a person dies, or right after you do the mouth care and hair washing, what you can do is you can put, some people use like an ace bandage and under the chin and up, or you can take a handkerchief and put it under the chin and tie it up. And so basically what you're doing is you're closing the mouth and keeping it shut so that when rigor mortis occurs, so that's the stiffening of the muscles, that it's going to keep the mouth shut. And so you can keep that on, as long as you want, because sometimes the shroud can actually kind of hide that piece, or just keeping it, closed. But I don't know of any tricks, for keeping the mouth closed. There's tricks for the eyes, because just gravity wise, gravity, or it's going to loosen and the mouth will remain open, which is not a big deal. Sometimes it's kind of, unsightly. So that's why people want to keep the mouth closed.
Mhm.
Then also for the eyes, if the eyelids, you can just kind of take your, your hands and just kind of like do this, just kind of every so often, and it'll just kind of help them stay closed. But also you can make these little sand bags, like little eye pillow bags out of sand or rice, and just lay them on the eyes to close them just for the first couple of hours after someone dies. And, you know, it'll help them stay closed. And those are all
Angela,
things. Go ahead.
Oh, I didn't know if you knew, but if you were trying to demonstrate something, I think your camera's off again.
No, my
Okay.
camera's on.
Oh, maybe.
Can
just I
see her. I've seen her the whole time.
Okay.
Okay. It's just me. Go ahead.
That's why in all the old Westerns, they put silver dollars on the eyes.
Yes. So if you noticed, one of the pictures that I showed you in the presentation of my friend had coins on her eyes. And so that is definitely, I mean, it's kind of cool. And in her case, she had a wound on her eye. And so the family, you know, we kind of discussed like, how can we do that? Because we want to have a viewing. And so we just found like the prettiest coins that we could. And it turned out really well.
So you've talked a lot about hospice. If someone dies with hospice there, that kind of takes care of a lot of the bureaucratic and legal portions of it. And then obviously on the other end of the spectrum, in the case of an earthquake or whatever natural disaster where there may be multiple deaths, or even someone was killed in an accident in your remote location, it may be a while before anybody could even come. But in a normal circumstance, if grandma just goes to sleep and doesn't wake up, are there legal reporting timeframes? Who do you call? What are the procedures if you don't want to have the body whisk off to the funeral home right away? What kind of things, I guess, should you be prepared for?
You are required to inform of a death. If grandma wasn't on hospice, then you do need to make a call.
Is that the county health department, the sheriff? Who do
You would call, yeah, you would call the sheriff, and they can come out, and, you know, sometimes they can just, you know, say that it was natural. I mean, there needs to be a doctor though that does cause of death. So that one is a little tricky. So that's why it's always good if, you know that you are, you know, in your dying, that you go, I mean, hospice is a good idea. Yeah. Because if someone dies, they're gonna be taken to the medical examiner, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna have an autopsy. So if they go to the medical examiner, then they're gonna get cause of death, and then the funeral home is going to pick up from the medical examiner. So if you want to have a home funeral, then you need to find a funeral home that is willing to work with you, which is not necessarily easy to do, but it is possible.
So in other words, you're saying they would come pick up the body, make a determination, then you would return the body home to take care of whatever you plan on doing?
Yeah.
Seem a whole lot more peaceful if they could just make the determination and leave the body there.
Yeah, and so that's why it's good with hospice, is because you can leave the body there typically.
Okay.
Or if you are in a small town and you have a doctor who has seen the person within, I think the last, I don't know if it's a year or 6 months. So if you have a doctor that you've seen on a regular basis and they're willing to come to your home and do cause of death and do that, then it's fine. But the death certificate needs to be signed off by a doctor or a naturopath. And so it's just funeral homes have an easier time of doing it. I've done it
Looks like
without a
Emily
funeral
had a
home.
good comment on that.
What was that?
Yeah, I was doing parallel some pieces in chat, Angela. If you,
Okay.
so depending on circumstance, like what you're describing in terms of like, you know, a non-traumatic death of grandma's, you know, passed away, wasn't a major injury or anything like that. You can call 911 or you can call the non-emergency line. Obviously, those will create different responses, or you can ask sometimes for official confirmation of the death and also ask for some quiet time with the decedent first, depending on circumstances. So.
Okay, so they don't have to rush out. I guess my question is really if someone could come out, make the determination or essentially they have to verify that it was a natural cause as best they can. And then the family could have some quiet time and then begin the funeral processes.
Exactly. Yeah. So if the sheriff comes out, you know, and it's obvious that it was a natural thing, then they're going to tell you, okay, you need to call the funeral home. You know, it's not, and you don't have to call the funeral home right away. You can have, you know, some time, but you need to have someone that will say that the person was dead when they arrived. You need to have that documentation. Does anyone else have any questions? Oh, Ralph, you're muted. Oh, okay.
I have a question. If
Yes.
you don't have a pre-planned funeral, in other words, you haven't gone down and made arrangements and someone dies, even say they have a heart attack or something in your home, does a funeral home come out and when the time is right, if you want, pick up the body, or how does that work?
Definitely. So if you have someone who dies, then and so what the funeral home will come out and pick up the body, but also they will need to well, I guess the medical examiner, because you're going to have cause of death first. So more than likely, the funeral home will have exchange with the medical examiner. And any transportation that the funeral home does is they're going to charge for it. So whether they're transporting, you know, to the medical examiner, and then once the medical examiner is done, then they're transporting back to their funeral home. But they pretty much will take care of all of it.
They should ask if you have a preference of either arrangement or provider of arrangement. So you would be able to have that input as well. Otherwise, in order to equally distribute the calls, it will be whatever funeral home is available for that call. So it's another thing to think about if that's of interest to you or concern.
And Ralph?
Yes, can I get through now?
Yes.
Oh, great. Hey, when my dad died, he had a card that said, in the event of death, please notify Grants Pass Funeral Authority. Not an advertisement, but that's what it said. And that's all we did, is we called that and they took care of everything else. He was cremated and buried up near Eagle Point, I think. But there was nothing we had to do. The arrangements were already made. It worked so well for him, I did the same thing for myself.
Yeah, no, using a funeral home is very much, is very easy. And so I'm not trying to sway people from, using funeral homes, but I want to educate people about the ability to do it yourself as well. So
And
a
to
lot of
note that
times,
And to note that in a disaster, unfortunately, the funeral homes may not be able to get to you. So this is just another additional resource should you need it, I guess.
yeah.
It's kind of
And because a lot of times we assume that it's not possible to have a home funeral or to take care of our people when they die. So just having as many options as possible is always good.
Yeah, the nice thing about it, well, all the questions are asked in advance. So at the time of your death or whoever's death, you don't have to worry about anything because everything has been taken care of.
Yeah, and so that's one of the reasons why doing pre-planning is really great. Outside of natural disaster, mode, we have advanced healthcare directives that will help hospitals understand what our wishes are for how we would like our end of life to be, whether we want to have to be on life support or have artificial to have a feeding tube. So without that, then you will always be given that, and you will be on life support and given as many life-saving measures as possible, even if you are not going to be recovering from an accident, and if you are non-communicative. So it's really good to have that in place. And then also there are things called advanced death care directives, where it helps you plan out how you want your final disposition, which is what you want to do with your remains. So there are lots of different ones of those that you can find out on the internet. And so it's just a really good, concise, workbook to go through, everything from I want to be buried, I want to be cremated, I want a natural burial, I want, a $10,000 casket. I want, to be embalmed. I do not want to be embalmed. You can talk about your religious preferences. If there's any sort of religious practice that says that you are not to be cremated. And so we really want to be considerate of those things also when we are taking care of people after they have died. To be as respectful as possible. And it is 8:01. So yeah, if you want to be shot out of a cannon, that's maybe legal in Colorado, not Oregon.
I have just one more question about the Prep University 7-week course. How do I get more information about that? I'd like to take that.
Sure, Janice, this is Ricky Perrin. At the top of the chat, I put my email and my phone number. So if you
I don't
scroll
know
up to
how
the
to
top
get
of
to
the
the
chat.
top of the chat. I don't know how to access that.
Okay, so you can just write this down then. So you can see my name on the screen right now. So it's R Perrin.
Yeah, I see that.
Perrin at josephinecounty.gov.
Okay.
And you just email me and I can add your name to a distribution list. And whenever we hold classes and occasionally other information, I will send it out to every person on our list. And that's how we communicate those classes. And then you would register depending on the class, a lot like with this class.
Okay, Ricky Perrin at Josephine County, just write that all out in one word, Josephine County.
It's R Perrin, just R Perrin, not my whole name.
I re-put it in the chat, so it's at the bottom of the chat now.
Thank you.
I don't see it, but that's.
Yeah.
I saw when Emily would post a thing on the chat, but I
No,
don't
that's
see.
okay. So one last time, and then I'll close out with Angela. It's spelled RPERRIN at josephinecounty.gov, and that will get you to Ricky. She's our education and outreach coordinator, and she'll have all that good info. And then there are several folks who asked whether because they were going to miss this class or wanted to revisit it, how to get a hold of the recording. And I wanted to chat with you, Angela, first about how best to do that. So we'll decide that. And then between Ricky and Angela, will reach back out to everybody who showed interest in this class or registered for it on how to access the recording at a later date, if that works for you, Angela.
Yes, very much so. And we'll include contact information in that email.
Okay, excellent. Well, we are a few minutes over, so I guess we will close it out. And Angela, thank you so much for this fabulous and super educational course.
Yes, thank you, Angela.
Yes, it was my pleasure. And I'm
Yeah.
open for anyone to email crossroadsdeathcare@gmail.com of any questions.
Thank you,
Perfect.
Angela.
You're
Thanks,
welcome.
everyone. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much. It was very good.
Good.
Have a
We'll
good one,
see you
everyone.
all.
Okay, good night.